How's it going, PC Nation? Welcome back to a brand new video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what if John C Calhoun didn't drop out of the 1824 election. In 1824, the election was basically 5 people: John C Calhoun, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and I forget the fifth guy. Even though he got 3rd place, John C Calhoun thought, "Hey, I don't have what it takes to be president. I'm going to drop out before the election." But he ran for vice president because back then there was no running mates. But John C Calhoun had 182 electoral votes, just as vice president. What if, let's say he's like, you know what, I have what it takes against Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, Secretary of State John C. Calhoun, Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. I was Secretary of War and a former general, and Senator Andrew Jackson. I can beat those guys. Well, let's say he does win the 182 and becomes president. Who becomes his vice president? Because it would be Andrew Jackson. Because back then, 2nd place got vice president. In case you ran for vice president, which John C. Calhoun did, and he became vice president under in 1824 when John Quincy Adams won in the corrupt bargain of 1824, won in the House because Henry Clay was 4th place. He didn't get to run on the House ballot when it was tied, even though Andrew Jackson won more electoral votes than John Quincy Adams. In our real timeline here, he won more electoral votes, but back then, if you didn't win a majority, and that's how it is now, he goes to the House, even though he won the popular vote, which people think that's how we should select our presidents and not the Electoral College. But since Andrew Jackson didn't win the Electoral College, it went to the House, and Henry Clay voted for, even though he hated both of them. He's like, I don't like Jackson more, so I hate Jackson. Let's do John Quincy Adams, and that's what happened. But let's say that John C. Calhoun actually does win. He has 182 electoral votes. And his vice president, it would be Andrew Jackson, like how he was vice president under Andrew Jackson and resigned because Jackson was going to kill him. I think slavery is the biggest topic of his presidency. I don't think the Trail of Tears happens I think not as harsh, at least. I think it happens, but not as harsh under John C. Calhoun than it would Andrew Jackson. I think in 1824 we still have a little bit of a recession, but I think that instead I think we'll have a Trail of Tears, but earlier, because that's how John C. Calhoun was as a person, and the topic of slavery would be more spoken of under John C. Calhoun, because he was really pro-slavery. He was really pro-slavery, especially because he was from South Carolina. And he was very for South Carolina succeeding the Union, even though I don't think he lived to see it. In case he did live to see it in 1860, I think he did. But he was very for succession. But with him being president, I don't think South Carolina would succeed. I think the North would succeed. I think he would spread more anti-slavery propaganda and anti-slavery laws. He would make slavery a really big thing, and any time a new state entered the Union under John C. Calhoun as president, he would make them, or at least try to convince the state to be a slave state. And on top of that, I think the economy worsens because he's too focused on And I also think Andrew Jackson resigns as his vice president, and he becomes another vice president. And I think in 1828, Andrew Jackson actually runs against his president that he's under as vice president. Even though he resigned, I think he would resign 2 years earlier in 1826 and run in 1828 and win. I think Jackson would still win 1828, but I think we would be closer to a civil war, and I think we would have a civil war under Andrew Jackson than Lincoln. I think Andrew Jackson's presidency, because John C Calhoun is such a big slave owner, and even though Andrew Jackson is a slave owner too in this timeline, I think North states would more be succeeding, because he was big into succession. He actually promoted succession for South Carolina before the Civil War in the 1830s, 30 years before the Civil War even happened. So I think we would have a start of a Civil War before Lincoln was even president. I think Jackson would take the 1828 years and into 1832 to be president during the Civil War. I think it would be the North versus succeeding first instead of the South. And I think the United States of America would be more of a North, would be more of the South, because Jackson was very popular in the South. And I think the Confederate States of America would be the North. And this is a weird timeline, but I think succession would happen earlier under John C. Calhoun's first and only term as president, because then he would be president of the Northern Confederate States of America. Or just the Confederate States of America. I think he would be president of the North. I think the North will succeed because Jackson's a big slave owner, but the South that was their popular thing, was big slave. But I think John C. Calhoun would be president of the North. I think he would actually be with Jackson. I think Jackson would replace his current vice president, see that, slavery, they're both big slave owners. I think he would replace his current vice president, fire him, make John C. Calhoun his current vice president, and someone else would be president of the North. I think we would still have a civil war, but it would be earlier. I think it'd be Jackson would be the president of the South, which would be the United States of America. I think the South wouldn't succeed. I think the North would succeed under Union, because John C. Calhoun 4 years earlier would want a lot of slave states, and South would agree. And I think some of the North would disagree, but a lot of them would succeed, but not all of them would succeed from the Union. But that's my what if John C. Calhoun was president in 1824. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, press share button, press like button, press right shiny subscribe button, press post so you can find it, upload video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.